Imagine an officer at your door because an algorithm said you were likely to commit murder. Not because you did, but because a model predicted you would. What happens when we let code point the finger? It's not pure science fiction. What we should do before probabilistic judgment becomes real-world punishment. Stories about pre-crime, where people are arrested for future acts, are old sci-fi. They are meant to make us uncomfortable. But the modern version isn't psychic. It's statistical. Today's systems don't divine intent. They look for patterns in data, previous arrests, where people live, who they associate with, and spit out probabilities. A score of 92% becomes a headline, a priority flag, or a reason for a visit from law enforcement. Probabilities sound scientific. That's the danger. A number can masquerade as truth. Here's how those systems actually work. First, someone collects data, arrest records, calls for service, social media signals, whatever is available. Then engineers train a model to find correlations. The model learns that certain patterns precede certain outcomes, and then it predicts the same pattern in new people. Finally, the prediction is used to make decisions. That pipeline, data, model, prediction, action looks neat on a slide deck. But at every step, there are places for error and bias to creep in. Errors often start in the data. If a neighborhood has heavier policing, it will have more recorded crimes. A model trained on that data will learn that neighborhood as a predictor of criminality. The model doesn't understand causation. It encodes the enforcement pattern as if it were evidence of guilt. In short, the model learns history, including unequal history, and treats it as fact about the present. Models also suffer from spurious correlations. Machine learning loves patterns, even meaningless ones. If the data set contains quirks, say a particular kind of phone usage that happens to correlate with arrests in the training set, the model will latch onto that. Those correlations can be wholly unrelated to criminal intent, but they survive because the model optimizes for predictive accuracy, not moral truth. We also have the phenomenon researchers call hallucination, where models invent links or outputs that aren't grounded in evidence. In large language models, that looks like confidently produced nonsense. In policing systems, it can look like a high confidence link between a suspect and a criminal network that doesn't exist. Humans trust confident sounding things. That trust is exactly what amplifies harm when the model is wrong. Here's a striking additional claim you'll hear, that I can tell from a single photo of someone's iris whether that person is male or female. People make similar claims about predicting personality, intent, or propensities from tiny biometric traces. The alarming thing is how this is often presented, as if the model knows why it makes that call. The reality is we don't really know how many of those classifiers reach their conclusions. The model can output male or female with a confidence score. But that doesn't mean there's a clear interpretable reason in the data that maps to biology or behavior. In other words, the system gives an answer. The system can report its confidence. But neither the system nor we necessarily understand the causal basis of that answer. The same will go for its predictions about future crimes. Confidence is not explanation. What does a false positive feel like on the ground? Imagine being flagged as high risk by a system you never saw. You might get extra police attention, lose job opportunities because of an unexplained notation, or face interrogation based on an algorithmic match. Your community might treat you differently. Your reputation, already brittle, can crack. The harm is not hypothetical. It's reputational, financial, psychological, and sometimes physical. And crucially, machine outputs are often treated as more objective than a human's opinion, which means the usual avenues for contesting an unfair judgment can be harder to navigate. Now, let's confront the hard counter-argument, the one that forces people to squint at their moral compass. Imagine a world where you follow the model's predictions, and as a result, crime and terrorism drop by 99%. How do you justify not listening to it? If lives are saved at that scale, the utilitarian impulse is powerful. Why tolerate even a few errors if overall harm plummets? That hypothetical forces us to weigh two things at once: outcomes and rights. On one hand, reducing harm at scale is a compelling moral claim. On the other hand, the distribution of error matters as much as the aggregate benefit. If the 1% of errors fall disproportionately on marginalized communities, you trade lower overall crime for concentrated injustice. You can't ignore who bears the cost. You also risk institutionalizing a system that's opaque and unaccountable simply because it produces good headline numbers. There are other second-order harms to consider. A system that's accepted because it reduces crime dramatically may become harder to regulate, harder to audit, and more susceptible to mission creep. Today's risk score could become tomorrow's permanent mark on a record, affecting housing, employment, and voting. The social acceptance of algorithmic authority can also erode democratic legitimacy. Decisions that used to require public debate and legal standards become outsourced to private models and private vendors. So how do you reconcile the two sides? You don't have to choose purely between utility and rights. Thoughtful governance aims to maximize benefit while protecting rights. That means rigorous, independent evaluation of real-world outcomes, not just aggregate crime statistics. It means measuring not only how much crime fell, but who benefited and who was harmed. It means setting strict limits on what an algorithm can authorize without human review, building appeals processes, and ensuring democratic oversight so that if a system does reduce harm at scale, it does so under frameworks that protect fairness and accountability. Who is responsible when an algorithm-driven flag triggers an arrest? Is it the developer who coded the model, the agency that deployed it, the vendor who sold it, or the officer who acted on the output? Our legal frameworks don't map cleanly onto these new technical chains. Sometimes there's no clear record of why a model made a decision, who validated it, or who is authorized to act on it. That opacity makes accountability difficult. It also allows institutions to outsource moral choice to machines without taking responsibility for the consequences. This isn't to say we should stop building tools. Machines can help find patterns humans miss and free up resources for meaningful work. The question is, what governance and safeguards do we need before we let algorithms influence life or death decisions? There are concrete measures that reduce risk. First, keep a human in the loop. Algorithms should inform, not decide. A high-stakes action, an arrest, detention, or conviction must require human judgment, where that human has access to the underlying evidence and the ability to dissent. Second, insist on transparency and independent audits. Models used in policing and courts should be documented. What data were used, how was the model validated, and what are its error rates across different groups. Independent researchers and auditors should be able to verify claims and reproduce findings. Third, grant people the right to contest algorithmic findings. If you're flagged by a system, you should be notified, told why, and given an avenue to challenge the basis for that flag. Much like you can dispute a credit report, without that right, mistakes calcify into permanent disadvantage. Fourth, limit use. Some domains are too consequential to be entrusted to opaque, unverified systems. Decisions that fundamentally alter someone's liberty or life trajectory should rely on transparent evidence and established legal standards, not inscrutable black boxes. Fifth, improve data hygiene. Remove or control for proxy variables that act as stand-ins for protected attributes like race or socioeconomic status. Clean, representative, and well-understood datasets lower the chance that bias becomes baked into a model. We should also resist the cultural tendency to reify algorithmic outputs. A number labeled risk or a color-coded alert feels persuasive, but confidence is not the same as correctness. The more we treat these outputs as facts, the less scrutiny they receive. That's a social problem as much as a technical one. So if you're tempted by the 99% argument, ask for the full accounting. Who benefits? Who is harmed? How are errors repaired? And who can turn the system off if it starts to be abused? If the benefits are real and the safeguards strong, society might choose to use such systems. But that choice should be democratic, transparent, and reversible. We shouldn't be pushed into it because a dashboard looks effective. If you like this kind of content, please share it.